Hello. In this video, we will gently tell the story of Audrey Hepburn's life. From her early years studying ballet, through her rise as a film actress, and on to her later years devoted to humanitarian work. If you enjoy this calm storytelling and want to hear more like it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Now, settle in. Get comfortable. Let's begin. On May 4th, 1929, a baby was born in Brussels, Belgium. Her name was Audrey Kathleen Rusten. Her mother was a Dutch baroness named Ella van Heemstra, and her father was Joseph Rusten, a British banker who had decided at some point that he was descended from Scottish nobility and had changed his name to Hepburn Rusten to match that belief. The family moved often, as families of diplomats and bankers tend to do. Brussels one year, London the next, then Amsterdam, then The Hague. Each city left its mark on the young girl. A new language learned almost without effort, a new way of moving through the world, a new understanding of what it meant to belong and then to leave. But in 1935, when Audrey was 6 years old, something fundamental shifted in her life. Her parents separated. Her father left. It was not dramatic or public. There were no scandals, no headlines. It was simply that one day he was there, part of the structure of her world, and then he was not. Many years later, when she was grown, Audrey would speak about this moment. She would call it the most traumatic event of her childhood. She loved her father more than any man in her life, she would say, and he was gone. Her mother took her to the Netherlands, to a place called Velp, near Arnhem. They lived with Audrey's grandfather, and at the time it seemed like the right decision. Holland was neutral, after all, or so people believed. Holland was not at war. It seemed safe. But in May of 1940, everything changed. The Germans invaded the Netherlands. Audrey was 11 years old. The country that had seemed safe became occupied territory. Almost immediately, her mother made a practical decision. She changed Audrey's name. She was no longer Audrey. She became Ella van Heemstra, a name that sounded more Dutch, more local, less likely to give her away to anyone who might be listening. And so Audrey lived through 5 years of Nazi occupation, from age 11 to 16 in the Netherlands. During those years, the country experienced what would later be remembered as one of the most difficult periods of the war. Food disappeared. The Germans requisitioned what was available for their own army, and the Dutch people were left with less and less. By 1944, the hunger was not metaphorical. It was starvation. People ate what they could find: bark from trees, bulbs dug from the ground, anything that might provide calories. Audrey was a teenager during these years, and her body bore the marks of that deprivation in ways that would never fully heal. She developed blood disorders. Her bones grew weaker than they should have been. The malnutrition of those years left a permanent mark on her constitution. But during those same years, even as she was hungry and afraid, Audrey danced. In the evenings, in darkened rooms, there were secret performances. People from the resistance would gather quietly. Musicians would play careful, soft music so as not to attract attention. Dancers would move in the darkness. These gatherings were known as Black Evenings, or Zwarte Avonden, and they were illegal. They were organized to raise money for the Dutch resistance, yes, but they also served another purpose. They gave people a reason to believe that beauty still existed, that elegance and grace and art could survive, even in an occupied country under Nazi rule. Audrey danced in these rooms. She was young and thin from hunger, but still she moved. She learned to carry messages for the resistance. She ran food to Allied pilots who were hiding in the countryside, waiting to be smuggled to safety. She learned to move quietly through an occupied city. She learned that she could be useful in ways that had nothing to do with being beautiful or perfect. She learned that she could help save lives. When the war ended in May of 1945, the Canadian soldiers came to liberate the village. Audrey emerged from the cellar where her family had been hiding during the final battles. The first thing she noticed was the smell: cigarette smoke. It was sharp and acrid, and nothing like anything she had smelled during the years of the occupation. One of the soldiers offered her a cigarette. She took it, and it made her cough. But for the rest of her life, that smell would mean freedom to her. That acrid, impossible smoke would be forever connected in her memory to the moment she was finally free. After the war, in 1945, Hepburn moved with her mother and siblings to Amsterdam, where she began ballet training. They had very little money. What remained of the family fortune had been lost. Her mother found work as a cook in wealthy homes, as a housekeeper. They were poor in a way that required constant attention to how they spent each penny. But Audrey had discovered something during the war years, during those black evenings in occupied Holland. She had discovered that she loved to move. She loved to dance. She loved the way that dance could communicate things that words could not say. And now that the war was over, with the world returning to something like normalcy, there was a possibility, there was a path that seemed to stretch out before her. She enrolled in ballet training at the Ballet Rambert, one of the most respected ballet schools in London. She was accepted as a student. Every day she would go to the studio, and she would do the same movements, the same stretches, the same precise positions, over and over again. Her body was still recovering from the years of malnutrition. She was fragile in ways that she tried to hide. But she trained. She believed that this was her future. During this time, she came to understand ballet as a discipline, as a way of moving through the world with precision and grace. She trained for several years, working toward the dream of becoming a professional dancer, a prima ballerina. But sometime during this period, the accounts vary slightly, but the result was always the same. Someone told her something that was very difficult to hear. Her height was not ideal for classical ballet. Her frame was too large. Her proportions were not quite right for the roles she dreamed of playing. And there was something else, something that could not be changed. The malnutrition from her childhood, the years during the war without proper food, had changed her body in fundamental ways that would not be reversed. She would not have the physical capacity to sustain a career as a professional ballet dancer. She had survived war. She had survived hunger. She had run messages for the resistance. She had danced in darkened rooms to raise money for people fighting for freedom. And now, the one thing she wanted most in the world, the one dream that had sustained her through the difficult recovery after the war, was being taken from her by her own body, by forces she could not control or change. But Audrey did not stop moving. She did not retreat into bitterness or despair. Instead, she pivoted. She began to take acting classes. She appeared in small roles in films. She worked as a model. If she could not be a classical dancer, She would find other ways to move, other ways to perform, other ways to exist in the world as an artist. And then in 1951, something happened that would change the trajectory of her life completely. There was a French writer, very famous and very old, named Colette. She was nearly 80 years old and confined to a wheelchair because of arthritis. She had written a novella called Gigi years before, and now a stage adaptation was being prepared for Broadway. Colette had been searching for the right actress to play Gigi. She had been what one observer called a compulsive Gigi spotter. She would see women everywhere and think, "There, that's my Gigi." But she hadn't found the right person yet. In 1951, while filming in a movie called Monte Carlo Baby in Monaco, Audrey was on location at the Hotel de Paris, and Colette happened to be staying at the same hotel. One day, Colette was being wheeled through the lobby or along the seafront, the accounts vary slightly, when she saw Audrey. The moment Colette saw her, she reportedly said to herself, "There is Gigi." She later wrote about it. "The moment I saw her, I could not take my eyes away. There, I said to myself incredulously, is Gigi." That afternoon, she offered Audrey the part. Audrey had never spoken on a stage before. She had no theater experience. She told Colette, "I wouldn't be able to because I can't act." But Colette, who was bold and unconventional, wouldn't accept that answer. She challenged Audrey to follow her instincts, to take the risk, to seize the opportunity. An actor on the film set, Marcel Gallio, gave Audrey advice that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Follow your instincts," he told her. "If it feels right, it will be right." 11 words that became her North Star. So in 1951, Audrey traveled to Broadway in New York. On November 24th, 1951, Gigi opened at the Fulton Theater. It was her first major stage role. She was 23 years old. She was terrified. She had no experience. But something miraculous happened. The reviews the next morning used words like magnificent and luminous. She had gone from being an unknown actress to being a Broadway star in a matter of months, and the entire entertainment industry was now watching her carefully to see what she would do next. In 1953, just 2 years after her Broadway debut, Audrey made a film called Roman Holiday. She played a princess, a young royal, who escaped from her duties for a single day in Rome and who fell in love with an American reporter played by Gregory Peck, who was already an established star. On the set of that film, Gregory Peck made a generous choice. He asked that Audrey's name be placed at the top of the credits, alongside his own. When people asked him why, he said simply, "She is going to be a big star. If her name is smaller than mine, I will look like a jerk." The film was released in 1953 and was an immediate success, and Audrey won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance. It was her first major film. She was 24 years old. In just 1 year, she had gone from nobody to one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. Every studio wanted her. Every director wanted to work with her. She had become what people at the time called the it girl, the new sensation, the next big thing in cinema. But Audrey was different from the actresses who had come before her. She was thin, where other actresses were curvaceous. She was understated, where other actresses were glamorous. She did not fit into the mold that Hollywood had been creating for decades. She looked like she belonged in a different kind of film, not a big, loud spectacle, but something more intimate, something more introspective. There was something about her that suggested an inner life, a a complexity, a world of thought and feeling that existed beneath the surface. In 1954, Audrey appeared in a film called Sabrina, and during the filming of this movie, she met a French fashion designer named Hubert de Givenchy. He had just started his own fashion house. He was not yet famous. He was at the beginning of what would become a legendary career in fashion design. When Audrey requested real Parisian couture for her costumes, instead of the standard costumes that Hollywood studios made for their actresses, she went to see Givenchy at his atelier in Paris. He did not recognize her at first. He actually thought she might be Audrey Hepburn. But they talked, and almost immediately, something clicked between them. There was an understanding, a mutual recognition of what each of them was trying to do in their respective arts. Givenchy designed her clothes for Sabrina, and from that moment on, he continued to design for her, for decades, for the rest of her life. He would be the one who created the clothes that Audrey wore on screen and off. They worked together constantly. They collaborated. They understood each other in a way that transcended the professional relationship. But their connection was more than just professional. They loved each other deeply. Some people who were close to Audrey believed that if her personal life had unfolded differently, if circumstances had aligned in a different way, if she had been free to choose, she and Givenchy would have married. But they did not. Instead, they became something rarer and more beautiful in its own way. They became true partners. They became collaborators in the creation of beauty. They understood each other. In 1954, the same year she met Givenchy, Audrey also married an actor named Mel Ferrer. They had worked together on a Broadway production called Undine, and they had fallen in love. Or at least, they believed they did. By most accounts that have survived into the historical record, the marriage was difficult from the beginning. Mel Ferrer was described as controlling, as domineering, as someone who wanted to shape Audrey and direct her and control every aspect of her life and career. Other actors noticed it. Colleagues saw how he behaved toward her. But Audrey seemed drawn to his strength, or perhaps to what she perceived as strength. She had been abandoned by her father when she was 6 years old, and that abandonment had left a wound that never quite healed. So she sought out men who seemed strong, who seemed like they would not leave, who seemed like they would stay. She wanted children. That was very important to her. She wanted to create a family, to be a mother, to build the kind of home that she had never had as a child. But her body, still affected by the severe malnutrition of her childhood during the war, could not carry pregnancies to full term. In March 1955, she became pregnant, but she had a miscarriage. Years later, in 1959, while she was pregnant and filming a Western called The Unforgiven, she fell from a horse in January. The fall was severe. As a result, she miscarried in May of that year. These losses were devastating. Each one meant that the dream she held seemed to slip further and further away. But she did not give up. In late 1959, she became pregnant again. This time, she stepped away from all work to protect the pregnancy. On July 17, 1960, she gave birth to a son named Sean. Finally, she had become a mother and had created the family that she so desperately wanted to create. In 1957, Audrey appeared in a film called Funny Face, and these roles throughout the 1950s cemented her status as one of the most important actresses in cinema. She was in demand. She was celebrated. She was becoming an icon. But in 1958, something happened in the literary world that would eventually have a profound impact on her career and her legacy. An American writer named Truman Capote published a novella called Breakfast at Tiffany's. It was a short book, barely more than 100 pages, but it was witty and sophisticated and deeply observed. It told the story of a character named Holly Golightly, a woman who lived in New York City and moved through the world with charm and mystery and a kind of tragic grace. When Capote wrote the novella, he had originally envisioned a different actress in the role. He thought of Marilyn Monroe. He believed Marilyn was perfect for Holly Golightly, but Hollywood had other ideas. When the time came to adapt the novella into a film, the producers decided to cast Audrey Hepburn instead. This was, in many ways, a controversial choice. Audrey was known for playing elegant, graceful characters, princesses and noble women. Holly Golightly was something different. Holly was worldly. Holly was morally ambiguous. Holly was a woman who lived on the edge of respectability. Some people questioned whether Audrey could play such a role. Some people thought she was too innocent, too refined, too ethereal to capture the essence of Holly Golightly. But in 1961, the film Breakfast at Tiffany's was released, and what happened was extraordinary. She was magnificent. She brought a depth to the character that transcended the novella. She played Holly with vulnerability and intelligence and a kind of sadness that lurked beneath the surface charm. She showed the world that Holly was not just a charming socialite, but a woman who was lost, who was searching for something she could not quite name, who was running from something in her past. The film was a triumph. Audrey's performance was celebrated. She was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, though she did not win, but it did not matter. Breakfast at Tiffany's had become a masterpiece, and Audrey had proven that she could play complex, morally ambiguous characters, not just perfect, elegant ones. In 1964, Audrey made My Fair Lady, another iconic film where she played Eliza Doolittle, a flower girl who was transformed into a lady through the efforts of a demanding professor of phonetics. Again, Givenchy designed her costumes. Again, she was luminous and brilliant. The film was enormously successful and won the Academy Award for Best Picture. But during all of this, during all of her success, all of her triumphs, all of the acclaim and recognition and love from audiences around the world, her personal life was following a different path. The marriage to Mel Ferrer continued to deteriorate. Years passed. She divorced him in 1969. She then married an Italian psychiatrist named Andrea Dotti that same year. With Andrea, she gave birth to another son in 1970. His name was Luca. But in this second marriage, too, there were difficulties. There was betrayal. There was infidelity. Italian paparazzi documented over 200 different women Andrea had been seen with during their marriage. Over 200. And she knew about it. In 1967, she made a film called Wait Until Dark, where she played a blind woman being hunted by criminals. It was her last major role for nearly a decade. After that, she stepped away from acting, almost entirely. She wanted to focus on her family. She wanted to try to create a home that felt safe, that felt stable, that felt like a place where she could finally just be herself, rather than performing for the world. By the 1980s, she separated from her second husband, Andrea Dotti, and later divorced him. She moved to a small village called Tolochenaz in Switzerland with her younger son, Luca. She was quiet for a time. She was out of the spotlight. She was trying to find peace. In 1988, when Audrey was 59 years old, when she had essentially stepped away from her life as an actress, when she was living quietly in Switzerland with her son, she was asked to become a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF. It was a question that could have been asked many times before, but for some reason, at this moment in her life, the answer was yes. Her first mission was to Ethiopia in 1988. She traveled there. She visited an orphanage in a city called Mekelle. There were 500 children in that orphanage. They were starving. They were experiencing hunger in exactly the way that Audrey had experienced hunger during the war, when she was a girl hiding in a cellar in occupied Holland. The same desperation, the same understanding that your body is consuming itself because there is nothing else to consume. She looked at these children and she saw herself. She saw the 11-year-old girl she had been, hungry and afraid and uncertain whether she would survive. She said, "I have a broken heart. I feel desperate. I can't stand the idea that 2 million people are in imminent danger of starving to death, many of them children. Not because there aren't tons of food sitting in ports. It can't be distributed." Those were her words, not the words of a diplomat or a politician reading from a script. The words of a woman who knew exactly what starvation felt like. Over the next 5 years, from 1988 to 1992, she traveled to more than 20 countries: Bangladesh, Sudan, Somalia, Honduras, Ecuador. She went to places that were dangerous. She went to places where there was active conflict. She went to places where most celebrities would never go, because it was unsafe, because it was difficult, because it required real courage. And she did not go just to be photographed, shaking hands with children, so she could feel good about herself or look good in newspapers. She went and she held children. She cradled them, even when they were covered in dirt and disease. She held their mother's hands. She sat with people in the mud and the dust and the heat. She was fully present with them. She was truly there. A photographer who worked with her during these missions said something that stayed with people who heard it. He said, "Often the kids would have flies all over their bodies, but she would just go hug them. I had never seen that. Other people had a certain hesitation, but she would just grab them. Children would just come up to hold her hand, touch her. She was like the Pied Piper." She gave interview after interview. She told people what she had seen. She gave talks. She tried to make the world understand the urgency of what was happening. The fact that children were dying every day because people in wealthy nations were not paying attention. In 1992, she went to Somalia. By this point, she was beginning to feel unwell. She had pain in her body, but she went anyway. She wanted to see for herself what was happening there. And what she saw in Somalia was something that affected her deeply, something that she could barely speak about afterward. She called it apocalyptic. She said, "I walked into a nightmare. I have seen famine in Ethiopia and Bangladesh, but I have seen nothing like this. So much worse than I could possibly have imagined." She told her son, Sean, "I've been to hell." When she returned from Somalia, the abdominal pain got worse. She went to see doctors. They ran tests. In November 1992, they found cancer. It had been growing inside her for years, silently, while she was traveling the world, trying to save other people's children, while she was giving everything she had to try to make a difference. Her body had been dying, even as she was doing this work. The cancer was advanced. It was in her small intestine. It had spread like a thin coating over her organs. The doctors told her that her prognosis was poor. She was offered aggressive treatments, experimental options, ways to extend her life by a few months, perhaps a year if she was very lucky. She could fight. She could try everything. She could go through surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. Or she could go home. She chose to go home. With help from her old friend, Hubert de Givenchy, the designer who had loved her all those years, she arranged for a private jet to take her from Los Angeles back to Switzerland. She decorated her home with flowers. She surrounded herself with her family. On January 20th, 1993, she died there, in her sleep. She was 63 years old. Her sons have continued her work. They created the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund. They travel to the same places she went. They work with the same organizations she worked with. They carry forward what she started. They carry forward the understanding that one person with commitment and with courage can actually make a difference in the world. So there was Audrey Hepburn, a girl who survived war, who survived hunger, a woman who became an icon and understood that being an icon meant something, that it meant having a responsibility, a woman who wore Givenchy and played Holly Golightly in a little black dress that changed fashion forever. And in the end, a person who found her real purpose, not in Hollywood or on film sets, but in the poorest corners of the world, holding children who had nothing, making them understand that they mattered, that they were worth saving. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Rest well.